up. So if you're uncomfortable with that, you feel free to turn off your camera or if you need to, exit the meeting. But tonight's meeting will be recorded and put up on the website of the Vermont Climate Action Office. My name's David Plum. I'm really happy to be here talking with all of you tonight. We're going to have an interesting meeting tonight of discussion, some presentation. This is an issue that's really important to a lot of Vermonters. It's important to the Vermont Climate Council and other folks who are behind the work we're going to talk about this evening. I'm going to kick us off with some opening slides. My role in this process has been to facilitate meetings of the Vermont Climate Council, to do some of the public engagement. Some of you may have seen me on a little Zoom screen like this previously. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I'll do a little presentation. Then we're going to have Vermont climate counselors present some of the plan. And then we're going to have some discussion about Vermont's Climate Action Plan, which was updated last year and is relevant this year for a variety of actions. So let me kick it off. The agenda. First of all, we're going to dive into the updated Climate Action Plan, what it is, how it was updated, and a quick hit on 10 priority actions that the Vermont Climate Council has identified. We're going to have a discussion about what's most compelling, and any clarifying questions you might have. And then we're going to have a few of the counselors and also the head of Vermont's Climate Action Office on a little panel to talk about what's next and the actions that happen. And then amongst all of us, we'll have a conversation about that as well. We're going to try to not have this just be, us talking at you. Now, I wanted to say one thing. We did have a request for interpretation this evening, and I want to make sure, that our interpreter can hear me. So Jim, are you hearing me okay? Okay, great. Now, to use the interpretation, we had a request for interpretation in Spanish, and to use that, if you click on the three little dots, or maybe you have a little icon of a globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen. This is for Spanish interpretation. You can click on that globe and select the Spanish channel. I'm just checking to see if that person that had requested that is actually here, and I'm not seeing that person, Sophie, right now, am I? No. Okay. So when that person comes, I'll make sure that they know that. But we will be doing that when that person comes. Okay. And I'll try to speak at a good pace for that. So let's kick it off. I'm going to say a few things about the Climate Action Plan. Counselors are going to say a few things about what's in it, and then we'll start with some back and forth. All right, so here we go. Why do we plan around climate? Well, this is one of the reasons. It's not the only reason, but it's certainly one, which is Vermont feels the impact of a changing climate. Among the states in the US, it has the seventh highest number of federally declared disasters, disproportionate impacts, curiously not being a coastal state, but it feels it for all the reasons that we know, the flooding in particular, but that's not the only reason. You can see some of these Vermont counties in their ranking of disaster declarations. So this is one key reason that as a state, doing some planning around how to be more prepared for climate, how to be doing Vermont's part in reducing the forces of climate change. This is one of the reasons. There are others as well, and climate counselors can chime in later tonight about them. Okay, many of you know this story. Back in 2020, the Vermont State Legislature passed the Global Warming Solutions Act that created, among other things, the Climate Council. It was told to make a plan to reach some mandates of emissions reductions and do other things. It did that in December 2021, and it has to update every 4 years. And it was just updated in July last year. And it's a pretty big effort. We'll see it's like the breadth of it is pretty large. And we'll be using that acronym tonight, the CAP. So if you hear CAP, that's what it is, Climate Action Plan. What's in it? We'll hear about the 10 priority actions in just a sec, but this is the breadth of information that's in the Climate Action Plan and the updated version. So one of the things is how do we reduce climate pollution? Like how do we reduce the emissions that are causing climate change? And you're going to hear some jargon tonight, which is called cross-sector mitigation. But mitigation is just another way of saying how do we stop emitting so much warming gases into in the atmosphere. And there, the focus on transportation, buildings, electricity. There's some other things, but those are the three biggies. There's also a big section around land and supporting agriculture and ecosystems, and really thinking about how to work with nature and nature-based solutions, both in terms of reducing emissions, but also making Vermont more resilient to the changes that are happening. There's recommendations around that in funding and investment and other things related to land conservation and supporting ag and good ag practices. Also around rural resilience and adaptation, there's a lot in there around the built environment and our rural environments in Vermont, capacity planning, and new to this update is public health. And then the cross-cutting pieces are also involved. That's education, workforce, and financing and funding for all this. So all these are contained in a set of recommendations and suggested actions in the updated Climate Action Plan. How did the work get done? Maybe some of you participated in this. Maybe some of you were members of these subcommittees of the Climate Council. The council is a diverse group appointed by the state legislature, and it has these 5 subcommittees that involve more people. And those people are the ones doing the heavy lifting of how do we update and refresh and make relevant all these recommendations. So you can see what those subcommittees are. A lot of work went into this, and a lot of people are involved. And speaking of involving people, the council worked very hard alongside the Climate Action Office, which is part of the Agency of Natural Resources in Vermont, to go out and listen. There was a concerted effort to go and involve Vermonters of all kinds of different persuasions in this updating of the plan. Some of that was in-person meetings across the state. Some of it was virtual. Some of it was just showing up at different groups' events and tabling and talking to Vermonters, partnering with some organizations in the community, and making sure all the meetings were publicly noticed and available, and opportunities, albeit brief ones sometimes, for public comment in all the meetings. So there was a lot of things that happened, and in that, some clear messages emerged. And so this slide, I hope it's clear, but basically what this slide says is, as the Vermont Climate Council went out and did this work of listening, particularly with its draft plan last spring, it heard some very clear messages. And on the left-hand side are those messages like, hey, folks, you got too much. Like you're coming at me with 200 actions. Help prioritize what's important for the state so we can take action and not get paralyzed by too many. And so the council heard that. And it ended up identifying a top 10, and it had a top 52 as well, or something like that. But the top 10 is pretty important. We're about to hear about those right now. Same thing, these other big messages, be mindful of the costs. So a heavy focus on affordability and what this really means. Need to ensure funding. The council went back after it got that input and created a new recommendation, a recommended action around how to fund some of this work. Also a comment about, hey, where's geothermal? It was kind of a oversight on this, and you'll see a geothermal recommendation in there. And a piece around language, making sure the language is accessible, cross-sector mitigation, that kind of language isn't very useful. And so there is a plain language intro and executive summary, some of which are already published and some will be published shortly. All right, so this was saying, hey, we heard you, and we're actually taking on board what you're saying in the key messages that came from when we're crisscrossing the state this spring and trying to listen to folks. Okay, I want to turn it over to 2 of the members of the Vermont Climate Council who are going to walk through the top 10 priority actions that the council was able to prioritize and identify late in the process. So first, I'm going to turn it to Chris Campany. And Chris, I'll let you introduce yourself, and you'll walk us through the first couple of these priority actions.
Sure. Again, echo Davis, thanks to everybody for coming out tonight and participating in this and your interest. My name is Chris Camp, Executive Director of Wyndham Regional Commission. I was appointed to the council to represent by the legislature to represent municipal interests among the regional planning commissions. I'm the primary point person on emergency planning and disasters, and then also conservation. And this is my second round on the second round turn on the council. The first, expand and maintain a permanent flood resilient communities fund. This has been a really important state funding to basically fund everything from buyouts to other mitigation practices that would not otherwise be funded by federal dollars. So some of the buyouts, for instance, in this case, would be those properties that were at either had experienced fluvial erosion or stream bank or riverbank erosion, channel migration that were not in the mapped flood hazard area. So it's been a really important tool to kind of help fill the gaps where federal funding wouldn't qualify. I'll get into the bigger federal funding picture in a minute, but so this is going to be a question for the legislature. To what extent do they feel like we're able to continue funding this fund that was created? Then critically invest in municipal infrastructure to support compact development. Why is that important? It's a number of different things. One, one of the resilience, if you read the Climate Action Plan, one of the resilience practices is actually building more housing, but also building it where it is, at a minimal risk to flooding and other hazards like landslides, fluvial erosion. And in order to build the number of units of housing that we need, we actually need like water and wastewater, streets, sidewalks, other infrastructure to support that. But also, if you think about it, within our region of our 31 or so historic villages and downtowns, if I'm being generous, only 8 don't have significant flood hazard risk. So actually investing in infrastructure to help evolve these communities, find ways to adapt to the flooding environment that is only getting worse is going to be really essential. So, and also it helps achieve other climate action goals like greenhouse gas mitigation. If you don't have to rely on automobiles as much, if it's cheaper to heat and cool, then that can help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Increase funding for programs that achieve climate goals on farms and in forests, and promote equitable landscape connectivity and conservation. As we think about the overall Vermont landscape, our working lands are so important, and supporting our local farms and working forests is, as Vermonters, supporting our fellow Vermonters is really important. But then also, right, the other side of the coin of compact settlement is the need to conserve land, especially up in the headwaters, trying to help both hold the soil, hold the water, mitigate flooding, but then also trap and hold greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide. And later on, we'll get into the funding dynamic. But one thing I'll just note is that we have seen a reduction in federal funding across the board for climate adaptation and resilience measures. But also critically, we're right now, we need to pay attention to what's happening with our neighbors up in the Northeast Kingdom, where a federal disaster declaration was denied. So one of the watchwords is really going to be, we're going to have to really think about what does self-reliance look like at all levels of government, but really starting at the local level, because it's entirely possible and likely that our reliance on federal funding to recover from federal disasters and then hoping that the state can chip in too may not be the new reality. And so we're really going to have to start thinking ahead about how do we first reduce the flood, and I'm talking about flooding a lot now because when I saw that and fluvial erosion are our greatest risk, but there's also, right, there's heat, there's landslides, there's heavy snows, other things too. But we're really going to have to, I think, adopt a more self-reliance mindset. And Jared, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, everybody. Thanks again for taking the time to join and really glad to be with you. My name is Jared Duval. My day job is as Executive Director of the Energy Action Network, which is a statewide nonprofit organization that does data tracking, research, and analysis related to energy, economics, and emissions. And I was appointed to the Vermont Climate Council at the beginning. I'm in my second term to provide expertise in uh, energy data and analysis. I on the Climate Council, I chair the Science and Data Subcommittee, serve on the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, and on the Council's Steering Committee as well. So Chris shared four of our top 10 priority actions. Just want to also put these top 10 priority actions in context and say a couple of things about them. One is, the plan as a whole, the updated climate action plan, which was passed in July of last year, includes over 200 recommendations. That list was narrowed to 52 priority recommendations, and then the council went through a prioritization process to identify 10 top priority actions. So there's much more detail about each of these priority actions and the other 42 priority actions um, and other recommendations that's available on the Climate Action Plan website. But just to continue, and it's also important to note that these 10 that we're going through now are not ranked in a priority order. They just include the top 10 priority actions. A key one was around weatherizing the homes of Vermonters, prioritizing low and middle income households in particular. We know that weatherization has many, many benefits for Vermonters, including improved health and comfort, um, making homes warmer during the winter and cooler during the summer, reducing energy costs no matter what your heating source is, and also helping keep more dollars in Vermont by lessening the amount we're spending on imported fossil fuel and investing in a workforce and work that happens largely by our neighbors, by local weatherization workers. So, there have been studies over the years. I was just looking before this meeting at a study from 2018 by the Vermont Department of Health, a 3-to-1 conservatively estimated return on investment when we weatherize homes. In Vermont, we weatherize about 2,000 to 4,000 homes a year, depending on the given mix of federal and state resources. The council identified that it was incredibly important, ideally to expand that number, but at a minimum to maintain the work that we are doing in home weatherization, particularly for low and middle income households, because of the immense co-benefits that weatherizing homes provides in terms of reducing pollution, increasing health and comfort, and reducing energy costs. We also looked around the country, around the world at the places that are making the most progress in reducing climate pollution and doing their part to do that, and also help reduce energy costs in an equitable way. Most of the states that have seen the most success at that have a broad program to hold fossil fuel companies responsible for their emissions, help pay a fee for that pollution, and then invest in helping people move to lower cost options. Examples we found in California and Washington and Oregon state of cap and invest programs. Our neighbors to the west in New York are working on a cap and invest program. With the start of the new year on January 1st, New York's new greenhouse gas reporting program has gotten underway. And so the council identified that for any meaningful pollution reduction program, what we've seen in every other state is a greenhouse gas reporting program where the importers of fossil fuels are required to report those volumes as the underpinning of any policy or program that could begin to hold them responsible for helping to make the transition away from expensive, dirty, and polluting fuels towards cleaner and more affordable energy sources. So that was a key recommendation. Um, and more work is to be done there in terms of the reporting program in Vermont and continuing to monitor what other states are doing. Notably, also our neighbors to the north in Quebec also have a cap and invest program that helps reduce pollution and provide funds to their residents to move to lower cost and less polluting energy. Next slide, please. Vermont utilities have been really innovative and key leaders in helping Vermonters move towards electrification with things like panel upgrades, battery storage, electric vehicle rates that make the cost of charging an electric vehicle less than a third of what it costs to fuel a gas vehicle, for instance. And so the council identified that it was important to continue supporting the utility programs that allow Vermonters to move away from fossil fuels and towards electrification, both for the pollution and cost reduction benefits and also for the resilience related benefits there. We recognized as a council that the two elephants in the room, the two largest sources of both pollution and energy costs in Vermont, are related to the fossil fuels that we use for transportation and heating, how we get around and how we heat our homes and buildings, and identified a major opportunity to reduce both climate pollution and energy costs through greater electrification of transportation and home heating, both space and water heating. So there are recommendations in that space as well. Next slide, please. There is a recognition that longer term, it will, the places that are doing the most to help people transition to less polluting and lower cost energy are doing that with comprehensive programs like cap and invest programs, but those can take years to stand up. And so there was a recognition by the council that it was important to identify revenue sources immediately that can support all of these priority actions that we have listed, for instance, so that with federal support being pulled away, taken away, that we don't, for instance, see a decline in the low-income weatherization program in Vermont, among other priorities. And then rounding out this top 10, the U.S. Climate Alliance is a bipartisan group of governors, of which Vermont is a part, and they developed a climate-ready workforce initiative that's related to training and apprenticeships in terms of training folks for the jobs that help do all of this good work to reduce pollution and costs, from weatherization to heat pump water heater installers to EV technicians and on and on. There are many different categories there. So I think that's it for now.
Thanks, Jared, and thanks, Chris. Okay, so there you have it. Top 10 priority actions among a top 52 among 200 or so that are in the updated climate action plan. This is one of the multiple opportunities where you can feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom and we can ask some questions, make some comments. We're going to just do a little clarifying questions right now if you have it for Jared or Chris or any of us who've been involved in this process. So let's do a quick round now. If you are not familiar with Zoom, usually the raise hand button is down below. If you don't see it, immediately click on those three little dots and there should be should be able to see like reactions or raise your hand. And so feel free in the Zoom to raise your hand if you have a question, either about those top 10 actions or more broadly what's going on in the Vermont Climate Action Plan. And we'd be happy to go through those. Let me just say one thing before we dive in, which is we're a big group. We're 79 folks right now in one happy Zoom meeting. So thank you all for your good Zoom etiquette. That's been great. Let's make sure that folks, whoever wants to make a comment or ask a question can, so share the floor. We know this is a topic where we might have very different views. And that's great. That's okay. Just be respectful of other folks' views, just like you want them to be of yours. And let's stay on the topic tonight, which is Vermont's Climate Action Plan. All right, I'm actually going to drop the slides. I'm always happy to bring them back if folks want them, but I'm going to drop them now. And let's take a couple hands, and then I've got a little Menti poll for you in a moment so we can all weigh in. But Richard Hopkins, good to see you. You're up first.
Okay,
Welcome.
so what has to happen in order for a cap and invest program to be designed and put in place in Vermont? What are the steps that we have to go through?
That's a great question. There's two people on this call who would be very knowledgeable at answering you. One is Jared, who can be helpful, and also Jane Lazorchak is on from the Climate Action Office. And I'd be happy to jump to either Jared or Jane to say what are the typical steps and what's one step that Vermont is taking right now. Jared, you want to take that?
Well, first, I just want to say, this for folks who want to dig deeper, I put a link in the chat about series of studies that were done related to cap and invest. And I saw another question in the chat about just like what is cap and invest. So I'll take an initial I'll give an initial response to that, and then welcome Jane to join in. But the basic idea is that, and this is a program that Vermont, in a way, already participates in, has participated in for many years in the electricity sector. We're part of what's known as the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, and that program put a cap on the emissions from the electricity sector, from utilities. They had to buy allowances for the right to create pollution, and then those funds were used by the states to make investments as the states saw fit. So in Vermont, the RGGI funds that we have received have helped invest in primarily in home weatherization for Vermonters. But other states use those revenues in different ways. So there's a dual benefit of putting a cap that declines over time to reduce pollution, and the revenue raised from those polluting entities helps invest in making the transition to cleaner and more affordable energy more accessible for the residents of the state. So there are other states that have done put a cap on pollution, not just on the electricity sector, but also broadly on all fossil fuels imported to the state, including used for transportation and other purposes. Quebec is an example, California, Oregon State, Washington State. But the basic idea is you put a cap on the amount of pollution that you want to see created that can decline over time. The importers, beyond the electricity sector with fossil fuels, the importers of fossil fuel into the state would have to pay a fee for the allowance to be able to pollute, and then Vermont would decide how to use those funds. The council's recommendation is that those funds would primarily be used for grants and incentives for lower and middle income Vermonters to be able to take many of the actions that can cut their costs related to weatherizing homes, related to moving away from inefficient and costly energy technologies towards more efficient and more affordable over time options. So, but regardless of cap and invest programs, what every jurisdiction has found is that if you want to be serious about reducing climate pollution over time and having a way to hold the fossil fuel corporations that are most responsible for pollution to help reduce pollution over time, the very first step, whether it's a cap and invest program, whether it's a clean fuel standard, any broad policy that a state has done, the very first step is what's known as a reporting program. We in Vermont know how much fuel we use as a state, the amount of climate pollution that creates, but we don't yet know the amounts of fossil fuel that are imported into Vermont by the different fossil fuel corporations. And so a reporting program is the first step to know that, and so that they can be part of the solution. And that is something that Jane could speak more to. But that's the first step that New York has undertaken as part of their desired cap and invest program. And it's something that other states like California, Oregon, and Washington have done years ago.
Great. Thanks, Jared, for that detailed answer. I want to grab a few more hands, and then if we want to circle back, I see in the chat there's a few more things on Cap and Invest, but um, uh, let me jump over to Jessica Lee Smith first.
Hi there.
And
I'm so sorry for interrupting.
yeah, go
I
ahead.
love everything that you guys are doing. I really believe in the weatherization stuff to save money, but also I wanted to just mention that you were discussing in the beginning about federal relief for the disaster in the upper state. What about the retroactive? Can't the federal government retroactively cover all the times that you guys were damaged by, you know, like your ecological systems, like maybe human behavior, like through the years, certain things that have hit the state that the state didn't recover from financially, like let's say for example the Hermitage or J Peak. Those are all disasters that qualify for federal funding, and they didn't recognize it at the time, and that's not your fault, and you guys are still injured from it. Is there any way of applying, through Mike Pichek or something, to the federal government and saying that they have to recognize those disasters, because we're still in the wreckage from those disasters? We never recovered. Just because it wasn't recognized doesn't mean it wasn't a disaster. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica, for the question. I think Chris is probably the most able to say like what it feels like to try to um, get recognition for a disaster or things like that. Chris, is any quick answer to that? And that might be a tough question to answer on the fly.
I mean, going forward, and I'm not being political, it's just fact. The policy of the current administration has been quite clear that they're basically withdrawing from the disaster response and recovery business. There was an article in CNN, a memo just released that they found that actually noted that they're looking at laying off the thousands of FEMA employees who were like the first boots on the ground after disaster, supporting kind of the disaster declaration process. And then these are the people that like come in and work with towns on developing the project worksheets, to ultimately get municipalities and other entities reimbursed after disasters. So I'm not optimistic. I mean, that in the next few years we're going to see any changes, and then it's going to be really hard to put the genie back in the bottle. Under prior administrations, I would say, even going back to Obama, they were looking at how to raise the threshold that triggers when a federal disaster declaration might be made. Vermont has benefited greatly from a really low threshold, $1 million threshold. Everything that's out there now is talking about like quadrupling that minimum threshold. So you think about in Vermont, one county area or one town or a few towns, where you have $4 million worth of disaster versus $1 million. That can put municipalities on the hook for a lot. So I would just encourage people to stay attuned to the news, keep an eye on what happens with the state appeal of the current disaster declaration that was denied. And let's see how our neighbors wind up having to deal with, a very real situation from the flooding that happened in July, how they handle that financially and otherwise, and what aid, if any, the state's able to offer, in this really challenging fiscal environment.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah. Let me go over to Carl Bayer, and then I'll grab David. Carl?
Thank you. What we think about in the Rye Energy Committee is how to protect the villages from communication and electrical outages, and why microgrids and community solar with battery storage is not part of the plan. And so my question is, why isn't part of this plan, at least from our point of view, to push the state to have a state plan supporting community solar, which does not exist now, and a state plan which supports microgrids? We know this is the way to protect our communities from snow, wind, and ice storms, and it doesn't exist as a plan. So my question is, why haven't we gone in that direction? I'm sure there are reasons, but I'd like to hear what it is. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Carl. I don't know the right person on this call to be able to answer that in real time. but I really appreciate the question. So counselors, if there are counselors on the call, I want to speak to how the plan thinks about these kinds of issues of energy
Well,
resilience.
maybe I could ask Jared. Maybe I can ask Jared about it
Okay,
if he wants to
Jared.
tackle it.
I'm sorry, Carl. Can you just repeat your question? I was having trouble hearing.
Yeah, why the council hasn't looked at the importance of community solar, a state plan supporting and encouraging community solar with battery backup, microgrids like there is in Patton, Vermont. Why we aren't moving in that direction when, in terms of resilience and protecting your communities from storms and snow and ice, that's the best way to protect the whole community. And I realize that that community is not just poor people, it's anybody who lives in the village who happens to live there. So I recognize it's not just about low and modest income people, but in Vermont, it includes most of those people.
Um, there was a lot of work that was done related to grid resilience, both residential scale and utility scale storage, and related to solar as well. It did not, what you're talking about did not rise to the level of a top priority recommendation, but I believe is addressed in the plan. Um, I think that one of the key things I think there was a big question of emphasis, and in Vermont over the both recent decades and recent years, most of the policy and regulatory focus has been on the electricity sector. And we were writing this climate action plan after the legislature had passed and a new renewable energy standard was signed into law, which addresses some of these issues. Whereas the biggest outstanding causes of pollution and high energy costs, the remaining fossil fuel dependence in the transportation and thermal sectors, have been relatively unaddressed. So I think that it's a good question. I think there is more in the plan than you would see just in the top priority recommendations, but I think it was also a question of prioritization and emphasis given how much attention has been applied to electricity sector policy and regulation in recent years versus the transportation and thermal and other sectors.
Thanks, Jared. And I will
Just as
note
a
that one of the,
follow-up, Jared,
yeah, quick follow-up, Carl, and then I want to turn over to David Mears.
yeah, the main information that we have about the possibility of community solar in our state is that it's very, very hard to do it. I approached Norwich Technologies, for instance, to talk about it with them, and they said, in our current situation, political situation, there's no chance for community solar to really expand.
Thanks, Carl. Okay.
Thank
Let me
and thank
go.
you for your answer. I understand, not a priority.
David Mears, over to you, and feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm David Mears. I'm a local attorney, and I served on the Climate Council. And just as maybe as an impartial response to Carl and a quick preview of some discussion we'll have in just a minute about actions that we can all take. The Climate Council does not pretend that we had all the answers or had the priorities right. And one of the pieces or one of the requests I think I have of anyone I bump into that asks, what can I do, is to read the plan, including, finding things that that appeal to you, that resonate with you, that are important, and dive in them deep enough to figure out what are the right actions that need to happen. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, but I also want to flag that, as Carl points out, if we have missed an important priority or an opportunity, the fact that it's not listed in the top 10 doesn't mean that it's not important. What this plan represented was the collective thinking of a large number of people that worked through a really intensive process led by David and Jane Lazorchak to come up with the best that we could imagine and that we thought was possible. But we weren't perfect, and we weren't most of us weren't paid. So it It was a labor of love, and it represents, like so many things in Vermont, what a group of volunteers can put together with limited resources. But that's not why I put my hand up. And David, I'll ask you permission to do this.
Yeah.
But I was really intrigued by the question that Sophie posted from Bree Hovland.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I take a run at answering that?
I'm so glad you do. Yes, please.
Uh, Bree asked, I think, a really important question that environmental policymakers have been, this is something that policymakers in my entire career, dating back to the 80s, have been trying to understand and work through. Like, where is it? Because you want to take the shortest path from here to there, from here to success. And for instance, when we knew that water pollution was a major issue in the 70s and 80s, we passed a law that put a huge burden on the largest polluters to reduce that pollution. And it made a lot of sense. It was efficient. It caused the polluters, the polluters, we're all polluters, I think, but the people who are the big polluters, the big companies, to pay the bulk of the cost. And it was hugely successful in a very short amount of time. The clean air and clean water that we have across the country is a result of that focus on regulating the biggest emitters of pollution. This is different. The climate issues that we're seeing, whether it's looking at the mitigation types of things where carbon is emitted and how we reduce it, depend heavily on individuals to act. And we are not so naive to think, and in fact, part of the reason for the focus on low and middle income isn't just an egalitarian idea. It's a recognition that without resources and support and assistance, that the bulk of the people in the state that all of whom are contributing to the carbon emissions will not be able to achieve the success that we need to achieve. But that doesn't mean, and the same thing with the landscape, the resilience that we need to build through restoring, recovering our forests, farms, wetlands, et cetera, also depend. There's a lot of individual actions across the state that are causing those problems, and the loss of those resources at a time when we need to actually expand and grow and protect them. But that doesn't mean that the question isn't a good one, or that there isn't. Pick the question. Someone asked the question about, don't, in a cap and invest program, don't the fuel dealers just pass the cost on to customers? Of course they do. And there's ways to construct and design the policy to address that, mitigate, ameliorate those costs. But there's a close relationship between each of us as individuals and the businesses that we work and live with that support our communities and provide the infrastructure and services that we need to get by. So I think in some ways the biggest challenge that the Climate Council and that all of us face is how to frame solutions that are ones that invite businesses and all of us as individuals to lean into this work because it's in our own interest. Because we find things that create broad-based benefits. And I'll give one tiny example and then shut up. But one of my colleagues who actually serves on the as an advisor to the Energy Action Network is Neil Lunderville, who is president of the Vermont Gas Company. And people have wide, disparate perspectives on the role of natural gas and in the climate policy arena. But the example I want to give is something that, I'll give to that company, which is in terms of credit, they said, you know what, we're not just purveyors of gas, we're purveyors of warmth and heat and in people's homes. And they have broadened their work to expanded it to include providing heat pump services. That's the kind of, if we can create an atmosphere in which our business community feels invited to step into climate solutions and not as opposed to having them imposed on them, I think is an interesting opportunity we should consider. I've spent a whole career in the business of regulating big businesses. I'm not in the least bit opposed to that. But I think in the case of climate, there is just no bad guy out there in Vermont anyway. Maybe there's some bad guys in the larger context of the nation and the globe. But in Vermont, there's no real bad guys to point fingers at. We have to look in the mirror if we're going to solve these problems.
Thanks, David. I'm going to take one more hand from Pat. Then I want to do a quick exercise for all of us. And then I want to get this panel up and running about what's next and what to do. Pat, did you want to jump in? with a quick question. Wait, you're on mute still, so hang on one second. You got to unmute your microphone. There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Something that I was hoping for in the top 10 is I'm wondering if there was any kind of a supply chain overlay in looking at what's possible sooner than later, because this is accelerating really quickly, and maybe it's buried somewhere else. But if someone could just speak to that, even if just briefly, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. And just to be clear, your question is about supply chain and the ability of Vermont to continue to function in the face of disasters, so we understand where our goods and services come from. Is that the question?
No, our ability to implement whatever it is we want to implement in terms of people able to transportation, housing, heating, and if there's going to be switch, the idea that there's a finite amount of, just as an example, a finite amount of minerals for a lot of the technologies that have been talked about by the Climate Council. And in fact, Vermont's clout in the minerals market is pretty much non-existent. So that overlay of what we want to do, what we'd like to do, and what may actually be possible because of huge constraints and demands in a global marketplace.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
sorry
thanks.
about that. Thank you.
No, helpful. Thanks. I'm going to put a pin in that question and we can come back to it later in the conversation. But I don't want to forget it. What I want to do right now, and Charlotte can help me with this, my colleague Charlotte Goodman, and drop a link in the chat. And that is for the 70-something of us right now, I'd like to sort of get all of us to weigh in for a second on a question. And the question is, what really is most compelling? Whether it's the top 10 or the other pieces that might be part of this climate action plan, but what is really most compelling for me or my organization or my constituents? If you click on that link that's in the chat right now, it's a little Menti link. It will ask you that question. Type a very short answer. The shorter, the better, because we're going to look at those answers as they go by in just a second. Charlotte will share her screen. So keep it short, a short phrase, a few words. What's really compelling here? What is exciting when you think about what's in this plan and what it represents for Vermont? Let's give it a second, and then Charlotte can start sharing her screen. Okay, so once you've typed something, look back up at the Zoom screen, and you should be able to see what came through. Right, so there's some weatherization pieces, cutting fossil fuels, soil health, compelling for what's important to you and the future of the state, implementing a cap and invest, identifying revenue sources, electrification, weatherization, another mention of the local solar, energy efficiency, which is related to weatherization. Right. And thanks, Letitia, for in the chat. Feel free to use the chat too as a thing for this. Right. How can Vermont come up with funds? Reducing consumption, effects on public health and being attentive to that. Okay. Well, take a second more, type something in. We definitely are seeing some themes, right? Some themes are coming through. Planning, emergency planning, weatherization, reduced throughput. So I think just to keep us going, Charlotte, if you want to hit the space bar, we can see what the AI gods think you all have said. Let's see if it
Oh no, I think
it's
I'm
doing
having
it for you.
this.
All right. Well, maybe we'll be spared AI for the evening. Probably does us all good. But I think the themes are clear, right? Weatherization, funding. There's a number of folks saying reduce consumption, energy efficiency related to weatherization. Um, we had some things on the soil as well. Okay, great. Um, by the way, we will publish a little summary of this and we'll get you a better synthesis of what just came in. I appreciate everybody chiming in there. All right, I'm going to put the slides back up because I have a quick question for folks, and the chat is a good way to do this. Hang on one second. Now, one of the first questions that came up is like, hey, what's the immediate next step? In this case, someone asked a question about, Richard asked about Cap and Invest. But I'm curious for where each of you sit. And it's more like what you could imagine doing or your community or yourself rather than what others should do. But if I asked you this question that's on the screen, what's an immediate next step to move these actions forward? What would you say? And I feel free to use the chat to throw a few things in there. Like, what is the next step in your all's mind? I'd be curious. If you want to raise your hand as well, we can do a quick round. And then I'm going to invite the panelists, the counselors, to talk about next steps and what this all means. But any quick thoughts on what could move this forward? Any thoughts folks want to throw in the chat or raise your hand on it? Lots of community education. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to downstream those doing you? Yes. Thanks, Chris. Right. Find out what specific projects need support. Yeah. And I think when we finish up today, you're gonna have a contact information for folks from the Climate Action Office, and they're always a good point person to learn about what's going on. Ken, do you want to say something quickly about next steps?
Yes, I just wanted to mention, identify funding sources, which, that's been talked about here. The federal funding is going away for a while anyway. I hope not permanently, but anyway, so that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken. Yep. And the legislature is starting right up, so it's, tis the season to talk about funding. Linda, you want to say something quick? There you go.
I'd like to see this discussion spread to the wider community.
Yeah.
I have been very involved. I have super insulated my house. I've got 50 solar panels. I have a hybrid vehicle. I share my house with other people. I don't know that other people have the wide view that I have on all the things I could do. And I'd like to be able to share that kind of information.
Yeah. Thanks, Linda. And I think that's a great question, right? And part of the plan is about education. It is about outreach. Vermont now has a climate action office and Sophie Veltrop is here tonight, leads their communications and engagement. And so there's more activity in Vermont than I think previously. And it's interesting, Linda, how Vermont might work with you, right, as a spokesperson for these kinds of issues and what's possible. Yeah. Nice. Okay. So I want to invite a handful of counselors plus Jane Lazorchak, who's head of the Climate Action Office, to just do a quick little panel discussion. Charlotte, if you could spotlight the folks that I had mentioned, it'll make it a little clearer. I'm going to stop sharing. And this should clean up your screen for a second once folks get spotlighted. But we have a handful of counselors here. In addition to who you've heard from already, you've heard from David Mears, and we've got some others with us tonight. And I have a couple questions for them about what comes next. So let's we'll just get it settled down here. And David and Joey Miller's here as well, Joanna Miller. and Chris, you've met already. David, I wanted to start with you because what what we're really looking at here is what will help implement, or what are steps that will help to implement this plan, and where could that happen in different places across the state? And I know I've heard an interesting metaphor you used in the past, David, to talk about how the climate action plan can be a catalyst for action. So perhaps we'll start with you, David, and then I'll run around the group. But do you remember the metaphor I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah, sourdough bread. I
Yes.
like so many people, I picked up sourdough bread making during the pandemic. I didn't get a puppy, but I did start making bread, and I've still at it. I felt compelled after I don't know, the little critters that make the bread rise. I feel like I need to keep them going. So, but the metaphor or analogy, I can never remember which is which. Here is that what the Climate Council did, or wasn't to try to solve the climate problem, but it was to bring a lot of ideas and thoughts together to do our best thinking to synthesize a framework. And if you think of it like a sourdough starter, that's what this is. It's a set of ideas full of yeast, really yeasty ideas that want to rise and expand and have that potential, but they need people to add flour. They need, they need kneading and pulling and rising. And it needs baking, and it needs people to make decisions. We didn't make decisions about whether we're going to mix in cheddar cheese and jalapenos into it or not. That may be what it needs. We just kind of got the starter going. So I think what I hope for from Vermonters is that people lean into this not with a goal of stopping it. It's too easy to stop. It's the easiest thing to do to stop public policy. You just create a fight and debate about it, and you can tie it up forever. And we're used to that. But what addressing climate change really needs is leaning into these ideas, figuring out the ones that have the most com the most compelling to the most people, and get moving on them. We don't have to do them all at once, but we have to do more than we're doing, and it's going to require transformative kind of thinking. And one last thought before I hand over the microphone is, that although I said, in response to that last question from Bree, that individual action is needed, but this is not a plan that says, recycle more. This is not a plan that depends upon individuals taking action in their own home and that collectively we just hope by magic enough people do it that it changes the way that we live. Sufficient to turn the needle on climate change in the state or to build a kind of resilience on our landscape that our critters and our communities need. What it's going to take is alliances, probably unexpected alliances. It's going to need coalition building. And if I could send any one message out to the community, it would be, like Linda describes being involved in her community, get involved in your community, find alliances, find organizations like Joey's, organization, or an organization that you find compelling, and get engaged with it. Your local conservation commission, work with your local legislators. Find some group of people and help build an alliance that can advance some of these ideas, the ideas that have the most meaning and support. That's how we're going to drive change. It's not going to be by fighting and arguing, and it's not going to be by individuals acting all alone separately.
Thanks, David. And I think that's a good segue to Joey. And Joey, if you please introduce yourself, and
Sure.
I'd love your thoughts on being a catalyst here.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Great to be here with you tonight. I'm Johanna Miller, Joey, and I'm the appointed Climate Council member representing a statewide environmental organization. So it's really great privilege to be able to be joining you here tonight and to be doing this work. By day, I run the energy and climate program at a statewide nonprofit, the Vermont Natural Resources Council. And a big part of that is helping to support Vermont's amazing network of community energy committees. I see many of them here tonight. So I'm going to just focus in on a few ideas for action. As you just heard, the CAP is a broadly focused blueprint on so many important strategies, and it's going to need all of us, individuals, communities, businesses and the state to embrace and advance these actions. Some of the strategies are readily accessible and available now. Some of the things that we've identified are going to require policy reform and change and new programs and new or expanded investments. It's going to require financing or funding. So we're going to need to, really be committed to helping make those ideas, move from idea to action. So a few specific thoughts, and I'm just gonna hammer home some of the themes that you've already heard, but just to underscore, if you haven't already, clearly many of you have, read the plan. Identify what strategies might be ripe for you or your home or community. And then after that, show up and speak up about those strategies. We're going to need to ensure that Vermont actually advances the policy and programmatic and good ideas identified in the plan. I mean, I would start, especially with the top 10 priority actions, but as you've heard tonight, and the ideas many of you have also laid on the table, it's not all encompassing, but it's a really important place to start. So that also means ensuring that your legislators and the governor and your congressional representatives are partners in progress. We need their help to ensure that the funding and financing that we need to make the programs work and the policy reforms needed to actually implement these kinds of strategies happen. So that means I need to hear from you. Call them, email them, or, meet with them. I'm talking about your legislators, the governor, in particular. And just to underscore the importance, you've heard from Chris Campany and David Mears right now, but I think it's so important to get involved locally. Many of you already are, as we noted, but working at the municipal level is so important. Again, one powerful way to do that is to help start or join a town energy committee. I'm happy to talk to you about that if you're not already involved. Turn to your conservation commission, or as Chris Campany mentioned, engage and show up and partner with your regional planning commission or economic development corporation. That's where so much good work gets done, mostly by committed volunteers. So it's a really important foundation of action. Also, just get involved with and support the organizations who are doing this work. David mentioned mine, but there are so many great organizations working in Vermont on food access and security and resilience and conservation and, pollution reduction. And we know we need, all of it now. We're in a real pickle, but in Vermont, when we import all the fossil fuels that we use that are contributing to exacerbating the crisis of climate change, we have a huge economic and environmental opportunity to do things differently. And thankfully in Vermont, we have a social infrastructure in our communities, in our still, working democracy and legislative arena to really take ideas and get things done. So I'm hoping that we all can commit to making the plan actionable. And I welcome your ideas on how to do that as well. But just a few of my thoughts. And thanks again for showing up tonight and doing whatever you can to help us move this forward.
Thanks, Joey. And let's pass it off to Chris then. I know, Chris, you had a comment you wanted to make around sort of self-reliance, and you had flagged it already earlier in the meeting.
Yeah, and I'm going to put another Wendell Berry quote. He's one of my favorite fellow Appalachians in the chat. We really are in a situation where we're going to be our own heroes. We're going to be our own saviors. We talk about local control, the importance of that Vermont tradition, New England tradition. And we're really going to have to start thinking about how we live that, because we're not going to be getting federal aid to really kind of subsidize a lot of the historic development patterns that we've had in Vermont, where our historic villages and downtowns are on alluvial fans and river corridors and floodplains. We're going to need to think about how in our own lives and what we can do locally to take on preserving and reconnecting floodplains to our rivers and streams. How do we conserve our forests? What can we do at our own household level? What can we do at the community level? But we're just not going to have the funding to go out and buy land, do buyouts. In some cases, we're going to really be struggling to figure out how do you replace that bridge or culvert once it's gone. And so you need to start thinking about that now, not when it happens, because it is a matter of when. I'm not trying to be a downer about it. It's just we're going to have to start living more of that principle of kind of the local control. But I would argue that the Vermont motto, right, is freedom and unity, and freedom is right. Being able, and I put this quote in by Wendell Berry in there about here I'll read it. A community is the mental and spiritual condition of knowing the place is shared, and that the people who share the place define and limit the possibilities of each other's lives. It is the knowledge that people have of each other, their concern for each other, their trust in each other, the freedom of which they come and go among themselves. And so one of the things I relate this back to the Vermont's freedom and unity motto, where yes, we value our freedom to kind of do what we want to do, but the unity piece comes in understanding that what we do as individuals and as households, as businesses, as leaders in our communities, as colleagues, coworkers, we have impacts on each other. And so having a little grace for the other person, little understanding, I think we've really got to become more united. So while we're thinking about local control, what can we do in our own communities? But then we also need to think about what can our collectivity of communities better do to be better prepared for what's coming, and then how to respond when it does happen. And I've talked a lot about infrastructure and public works and such, but we also just have to think about what happens when people are displaced. And so as we're having housing conversations in Vermont, right? It's great to talk about buyouts, but where do our fellow Vermonters go? So, part of the resilience conversation is also showing up to say, hey, we need housing for my neighbors, my son, my daughter, my coworker, my colleagues, my friends. And hey, we need to be there to support where this goes and in a place that's safe so that they're not going to be traumatized. And we have safer places to go. So it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of effort. We just have we need to have that sense of urgency, but also understanding the task before us is going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of grace and patience with each other.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah. Wow. By the way, I neglected to say at the top of the meeting when we're going to end. We're going to finish up at 7:15 in just a few minutes. I want to turn over to Jane, who's head of the Climate Action Office at the Agency of Natural Resources, to say a little bit about how the plan fits into the work of state government now.
Thanks, David, and thanks everybody for being here. I thought I might just take 1 minute just to explain the Climate Action Office, since we are a rather newer office within state government. We were actually stood up after the initial Climate Action Plan was developed back in 2021. And the office was stood up in response, in large part, to the depth and breadth that was put forward in the Climate Action Plan and the overarching responsibilities that the Agency of Natural Resources had, as well as all of state government, in meeting the requirements around emissions reductions and more broad objectives of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is our climate law in Vermont that was passed in 2020. So the Climate Action Office sits in the Secretary's Office of the Agency of Natural Resources. We're a staff of 8. We provide expertise in programmatic work around climate action, so decarbonization, thinking about emissions reductions, resilience and adaptation, as well as nature-based solutions, as well and expertise around monitoring and tracking and data. And then, of course, Sophie Veltrop, who helps support our engagement and community communications work in our office. We also have a broad responsibility, I'll say. Climate action is not within the Agency of Natural Resources alone, and we are guided through an interagency advisory board that helps us think about how we coordinate, amplify, and really support climate solutions across all of state government and advocate for a single voice in state government around how we advance climate spending, climate policy, and really coordinate and work together to push something much greater than any one agency could do on its own. So we have this unique responsibility also to help support and stand up the Climate Council, who is responsible for drafting the Climate Action Plan. As a result of that work, we form a relationship with the council, an intimate connection to the Climate Action Plan, help advocate and think about what the role is of government in advancing specific recommendations in that plan. And there is certainly no shortage of that right now with this current Climate Action Plan. And there are some specific recommendations, some of which we've touched on tonight in the top 10 that the Climate Office is currently working closely with the governor, the legislature, the session to move forward on. And those are some of the things with respect to funding for resilience and adaptation work that we've talked about, as well as standing up things like a greenhouse gas reporting program, which is foundational to understand the impacts and benefits of any kind of policy, whether it's a cap and invest or any kind of larger policy need to think about how we reduce our emissions from some of our larger sectors, including transportation and home heating. So I really want to just put that out there for all of you to continue to engage with us. We're here on behalf of Vermonters to think about what climate action looks like in our state. We are always open, thinking about how we engage with folks in events like this, and then in more meaningful conversations around smaller groups and topics that are relevant to all of you. And we work really closely with many of the partners who sit on the Climate Council and externally to help manifest all these great ideas that are put forward in this plan. So wanted to use that these few minutes to just really remind folks that we're here and that it's a really great service for the state of Vermont. Not all states have climate offices embedded in state government, and so it's really an added value to ensure these plans don't get shelved, but actually move forward, and we think about how to do that responsibly. So I'll leave it at that, but I'm want to answer any questions people have about specifics if there's time.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, and we're gonna our sort of final slide has a contact information on how to get linked in with the Climate Action Office and what's going on there and all the activity that Jane and her team are doing. Okay, David, one quick follow-up, and then we're gonna have to wrap up for the evening. But David, back to you.
Yeah, I know we're short on time, but I want to give a shout out to the folks who have kind of added to the comments in the chat about workforce development and engaging young people, which I think is one of those, it's just a great example of a no-brainer way to bring other organizations and groups and interested people together that both, whether we're talking about a climate workforce that supports the development of more energy efficient houses and heat pump installation or what have you, on the one hand, or engaging in a working landscape and reinforcing the viability of our forest and farm economy, or our recreation and tourism economy, there's great opportunities for Vermont that are unique to our state to take advantage of these aspects of our community and help deal with some of our larger socioeconomic issues, like how do we get more young people to come and live in the state? How do we make sure they have meaningful jobs and a lovely place to live?
Thanks, David. And there's one more counselor I wanted to make sure we hear from tonight who's here, which is Quincy Sabic. And Quincy, let me just give you the last word on this conversation. And thanks, Charlotte, for spotlighting her. Quincy, you just joined the council in December, but you've been involved through the subcommittee process for more time than that. So if you want to introduce yourself and, curious how you're seeing how the Climate Action Plan is relevant for work, whether it's in a school-based setting or somewhere else. But over to you, Quincy.
Yeah, hi. My name is Quincy Savick. I'm a senior at Regents Union High School, and I'm the student representative on the Vermont Climate Council. So I'll keep it pretty brief, but if you aren't aware, since the beginning of the council, youth voice has been a priority for the group, seeing as youth will be the ones that are most affected down the line. So me and the other youth representatives from the other subcommittees in the spring had a youth input session along with the other public info sessions. And some of the feedback we got was a lot about accessibility, like we talked about before, making the cap something that feels a little more accessible for youth and presenting it in a way that is something that they can understand and something that feels more actionable. So I've been working with my fellow youth reps, and we made a little resource that we've been updating that kind of has information about the Climate Action Plan, as well as other ways that youth can get involved in their communities. I just put the link to that in chat. But yeah, on our side of things, we've been mostly working on reaching out to students, reaching out to green teams across the state, finding ways that we can communicate the cap, and also other ways that you can get involved. But we're also currently working on making a little distributable document that we can bring around the state to different local offices to reach more youth. But yeah, my role is mostly to promote youth voice and just give that perspective to the council. So our next steps are to continue to update this resource, which you can definitely share with any young people in your life, and take a look at. There's a link in the bio of the page that will bring you to a bunch of different resources that we've gathered up. And we also included in there ways you can contact your legislators and other youth run organizations that are doing more actionable things on a larger scale. But we also made sure to highlight small scale things that kids can feel empowered to implement in their own lives.
Thanks, Quincy.
Hey, David, can I add one quick thing there?
Of course.
So it's been awesome to have Quincy and her predecessors, the youth involved in the Climate Council. And one of the things I would just offer, I attend as a regional planning commission director, I attend a lot of meetings with towns, a lot of planning commission meetings and other things. I'm 59 years old, and oftentimes I'm the youngest person in the room. So one of the things I would ask for all of us to do is bring young people to the meetings with you, invite them to participate, make sure they have a seat at the table, make sure they're heard, because we tend to, we're not doing ourselves any favors. We have an rapidly aging population, just, and sometimes, right, it's the older folk who have the time, the energy, and the effort to be able to participate. But if we don't actively bring younger people, the next generations, into the conversation, that's also going to deplete our resilience core, right? So glad that Quincy's involved in this and the perspective that she's bringing.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, thanks, Quincy, too. Yeah, if you're looking for a little rays of hope, you can see what Quincy's up to and her colleagues. Just in the interest of time, what I'm going to do is throw some slides back up. I'm going to leave you all with a question. And it's the second question on the slide here, which is, what else could we as Vermonters do to make the CAP implementation successful? We don't have time to talk about it right now, but I just want to leave it with all of you who was attending tonight. It's like, what might I do? And certainly you heard from some counselors about what they're hopeful happens across Vermont and communities. This is the last thing, though, which is how to stay involved, particularly through the Climate Action Office, which supports the work of the council and also does a whole bunch of other work. Sophie, if you want to just come off mute for a second, if you're there, and just say hi, because Sophie is a key person at the office there, head of the communications. Over you, Sophie.
Hi. Thanks everyone for being here. Somebody had actually written in the chat that a proposed action would be to get everybody in this call on an e-newsletter and share out some resources with you. I'm going to put a link in the chat to sign up for the e-newsletter. If you already indicated when you registered that you wanted to get it, you'll be added to the list. We'll also follow up after this to send everybody a recording of the event. And there was so much great conversation about how to take action at the individual, household, and community level, and some good resources shouted out there. So we'll be sure to include those as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Sophie. And thanks everyone who's put things in the chat too. It's been a lot of content and that's been helpful. And we haven't had a chance to shout out verbally everything in the chat. We will be doing some summaries of these events and include some of that content. So with that, it's 7:20. And dinner at least is awaiting me. I don't know about the rest of you. So I'm going to need to hop. And I appreciate we're going to do this all over again next week at a lunchtime hour. So if you know somebody who'd be interested in having this kind of conversation who wasn't here tonight, we're doing it again in a lunchtime hour as opposed to an evening hour. So I believe that is on Monday, right? Sophie, don't let me say something incorrect. But it'll Monday, right, Sophie?
It'll be January 12th at 12 p.m. So yes, that's Monday.
Perfect. Thanks, Sophie. And we'll do exactly the same thing as we did tonight. So if you know someone, let them know. We have quite a number of folks signed up, but we're always happy to have more. Thank you, everyone, for your time this evening. Stay in touch, sign up for the newsletter. Really appreciate the enthusiasm and the good ideas. Here's hoping we all make progress in 2026. Take care. Have a great evening, everybody.
Right.